Record. Okay, I am now recording. So yeah, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Jason, and I will be co-hosting this session with Kartik, but he's going to be a little bit late. We'll be here in like 5 minutes. So yeah, so let's start with the presentation. So the way, let's see, hold on, I'm inviting some more people. So sort of an overview of this session. The first part of it is going to just be this overview of the paper to get everyone on the same page about how UNet works and what it actually is and does. And then the second part is going to be the open discussion. So because we want to have room for that open discussion, we are going to go at somewhat of a brisk pace, but please, if you have any questions along the way, just ask in the chat, or feel free to unmute your mic. Okay. Cool. So let me open up the paper too. Yeah, so this is this week's paper. This paper was pretty influential and still is. It has like thousands of citations. This is one of those landmark papers that sort of changed the field. And we'll start by sort of reading the abstract, trying to get a sense of what it's trying to do, and then actually go deeper in and see what it's actually doing, how is it built, and some other methods that they use to improve their solution. So here's the abstract, and we'll just go through it. So first sentence, there is a large consent that successful training of deep networks requires many thousand annotated training samples. In this paper, we present a network and training strategy that relies on the strong use of data augmentation to use the available annotated samples more efficiently. And we'll also go through what data augmentation is. The architecture consists of a contracting path to capture context and a symmetric expanding path that enables precise localization. So contracting and expanding and localization, those terms will also be explained in like the next few slides. We show that such a network can be trained end-to-end from very few images and outperforms the prior best method, the sliding window convolutional network, which we'll also look at. On the ISBI challenge for segmentation of neuronal structures in electronal microscopic stacks. So the authors of this paper are people in the biomedical field. So the data that they're working with are all these biomedical scans, like CT scans and that kind of stuff. Using the same network trained on transmitted light microscopic images, so more biomedical scan stuff. We won the ISBI Cell Tracking Challenge 2015 in these categories by a large margin, hence why they are so widely cited. Moreover, the network is fast. Segmentation of a 512 by 512 image takes less than a second on a recent GPU, recent for 2015, that is. The full implementation based on Caffe and the trained networks are available. That's always a good sign. Okay. Kartik, you're here. Do you want to go over this slide since you added?
I am here. Yep, I can go over it. So basically, for this paper, they introduce a new approach as opposed to a previous approach, which uses a sliding windows convolutional network for this task. And the downside to that previous method was that it required a lot of training examples. And with biomedical imaging specifically, one of the major issues is that it's really difficult to get this huge mass of training data to create a network. And so what they did was they used data augmentation methods to reduce the number of training examples needed. And then they also improved the performance relative to the previous approach and improved the speed. So those were the kind of the contributions of the paper.
So I'll just go over a little bit of background because this paper targets a research problem that I think requires a bit of background to know, like how we got there, so to speak. So we'll kind of briefly go over the previous solutions that they mentioned in the paper, kind of explain how those work, and then build up motivation for this solution. So first, when we were reading the abstract, we mentioned this term localization, right? And so to distinguish between the terms classification and localization, you can think of classification as saying, what is this, right? Like we're classifying something. Maybe it's an image of a dog, right? We say it's a dog. Or maybe you say it's like 80% probably a dog, right? Maybe 20% a cat. That's what our model might think, right? And that's classification, right? What is it? But there's also another question we can ask, which is where is it, right? So if you have an image, for example, what you see here, and you're trying to classify it, well, you might get that, there's a boat somewhere in the image, right? In this case, it does not give the right classification. Is it space shuttle? Maybe it kind of looks like a space shuttle, but nonetheless, it's trying to classify something in the image, right? But the other question that we can ask is, well, okay, cool, there's something in the image, but where actually is it, right? So if you're giving an image with sort of a larger background scene, for example, like a dog in a park, right? Then, there's a lot more data in the image that you're working with. And so that dog could be really anywhere. Like it could be next to a tree, it could be off in the distance, it could be really close, right? And that information is very useful because, well, obviously you would like to know where exactly is the object that you're interested in your data. And you can look at, this is part of a video on localization. You could watch it here after if you want. Okay, so we have classification, we have localization. That kind of builds up the motivation for semantic segmentation, right? So with traditional classification, with a convolutional neural network, you take in an image, and then you output this probability distribution that says, 80% dog, 20% cat, or whatever, right? Well, with semantic segmentation, instead of looking at the entire image and then giving, classifying on the entire image as a whole, we actually look at each individual pixel, right? We say, okay, this tiny pixel here, what is it, right? Does it belong to, is it like a dog pixel? Is it like part of a dog? Is it a cat pixel? Is it part of a tree, right? And that's what this image explains here, right? So these colors are mapped to the classes that are being classified. So for example, this sort of yellowish color is a tree. It's being classified as a tree. So all these pixels are classified as tree pixels, right? And like, for example, the purple down here are road pixels, and so on and so forth. And there's also a cool video here, which shows this actually like as a video being live. Okay, and by the way, this is actually what Tesla does in Autopilot. It segments like a live video stream of, obviously there's cameras on the Tesla car. So it's able to take in this sort of video feed of its surrounding area. And then pretty much live with very powerful computers on board, actually segment each frame of the video to sort of, identify what's actually in its field of view and make decisions accordingly. So that's why semantic segmentation is really cool and important. Okay, Kartik, do you want to go over the slide?
I could. I could just, I guess basically for an overall summary of convolutional neural nets, kind of the way to think about them is you go image in and then out you get a distribution, which is essentially a prediction of what the image likely is. This is for image classification. And so I guess without going into too many details about sort of the convolutional and pooling layers, but just focusing on the inputs and outputs, with convolutional nets, we go input image and then output distribution. And like Jason was mentioning earlier, one of the drawbacks of this approach is that it can classify, so it can tell you what's in the image, but it can't tell you where. And that's, and with specifically biomedical imaging, one of the major things is, in addition to knowing whether it's in the image, it's really important to kind of know where it is. For instance, if we have maybe 2 cells in an image, it's important to know where the locations of those cells are, as opposed to just knowing that there are 2 cells in that image. So I think, Jason, if you have anything to add to.
Nope, I think that was pretty good. But yeah, I mean, if you've gone to some of our workshops, this is from the second workshop where we sort of gave a brief overview of neural networks. So this is like your traditional fully connected, well, we call these fully connected layers. It's different from a fully connected network, but in principle, like what they're actually doing is the same. So you can think of a CNN as just, you know, the fully connected network that you saw earlier, with this giant, you know, series of, you know, convolutions and pools bolted on in front. And the purpose of that is just to find all of these features, while also considering the fact that, while also considering like spatial information. So, you know, that might seem very hand-wavy, but hopefully it makes sense going forward. And then, so here's one solution they talked about in their paper, which, you know, at the time, I guess, was sort of the widely used solution, and it is called sliding window. And all sliding window is doing is you're saying, well, yeah, you have an image, but what the network actually takes in isn't the full image, it's actually just a single pixel, right? And so you look at the single pixel, and like this image shows, you pass that single pixel through your network. And at the very end, you classify that single pixel as like, you know, cow or grass or whatever. I'm assuming also you get a probability distribution. This image might be slightly misleading. This is probably just like the argmax of the probability distribution. But you do that for every pixel. And so you can imagine like that would probably take a very, very long time if you go to this pixel, running through a giant, you know, CNN, out comes the probability distribution, go to the next pixel, and then do that for all the pixels. And another thing that is important to point out is that not only is it slow, but you're also seeing a lot of the, oh, sorry, I should probably explain. So you don't just take in that pixel, you're trying to classify that pixel, but you do also take in a little bit of the surrounding area, which is what these patches are explaining right here. So it does see a little bit of local context, but what you're actually classifying, what you want to answer the question of, you know, what is this, is that center pixel. But you do see a little bit of local context, a little bit of surrounding region. But that sort of gives rise to the second problem, which is that because you're sliding over a little bit each time to classify each pixel, you end up seeing like a lot of the same overlapping regions, right? So if you look at these two images, like this one might be, this blue one might be the red one, like moved over to the right a little bit. But like part of the image in this patch is reused in this patch, right? So your network is seeing parts of the patch like multiple amount of times. And that is computationally very redundant. So perhaps there is a better solution. And the paper also mentions this trade-off between localization accuracy and use of context. That has to do with the size of these patches, which I think is something that is a hyperparameter U set. So obviously with a larger patch size, you're going to see a lot more of the image. You're going to see more context, and that might help you classify better, right? But you know, it's a very large patch, And because of that, by designing the network, you're going to need a lot of something called pooling layers. And pooling layers basically just take a really big patch and make it small successfully, like shrink it down. And the trade-off with that is that it's going to be harder to actually say, well, that middle pixel, like, where is it, right? Like the localization question becomes really hard to answer. So okay, Kartik, do you want to do this? Like,
Oh, I could take the figures after this one.
okay, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the other solution that they mentioned, and it's called the fully convolutional network. So all that it is, in a nutshell, is a convolutional neural network, but without that fully connected bit at the end, right? So there's no fully connected layers at all in the network. It's just entirely a bunch of convolutions, a bunch of pooling, whatever else you have going on. And so there's a few advantages with this method. One is that, well, it's actually able to handle different sizes of your input image. So one drawback of a traditional convolutional neural network is that you can only take in a fixed size. And that has to do with the fact that when you're designing your model, you have to sort of take into account like the size of your convolutions and pooling layers and so on. So that automatically fixes, what your actual image size can be. And for an explanation of why this handle variable input sizes, there's an excellent Quora post that I've linked here that you can read afterwards. But the big takeaway of this is that it takes in the full image, so not just a single pixel anymore, and it actually gives you those predictions for each pixel at the end, right? So that's what this is kind of showing. This is sort of like similar to the segmenting the road image. So in each pixel, the predictions are in this layer, right? So 21, that is the number of classes that it's able to predict. And basically at each sort of XY coordinate here, that corresponds to a pixel. So it's giving you a probability distribution over all the pixels. Well, for each pixel over all the pixels. It's kind of hard. This illustration is a little misleading, but there are two stages in this approach. The first stage is the contracting stage. So that's something you saw in the abstract. And basically, like the name suggests, something is getting smaller. And as you can see, these, what looks like blocks, are getting smaller. These blocks just symbolize the pooling and convolution layers. So it's actually reducing, like literally reducing the resolution of this image. Well, it's not exactly the image that's getting passed on to each layer. It's sort of becoming features discovered in the image. And you'll also notice that they're getting longer, which basically means that it's finding these more and more features, right? So these numbers on the side represent channels, which basically correspond to features that it's finding. And by features, I mean like, there's an ear here, or like there's an eye here, or there's like a bendy elbow here, stuff like that. And then in the second part, there's this expansive path. So it's basically the opposite of contracting, right? Instead of getting smaller, now we're getting larger, right? And that's important because if you remember, in the convolutional network, we just have a bunch of these. We basically just have the contracting path, right? And then we bolt on like a fully connected layer at the end. The problem with that is that you can't do semantic segmentation like this through that way, because at the very end, well, you have this very tiny, tiny output, right? And that can't map to the original input size, right? Like you can't go from there and then say, boom, this pixel is this and this pixel is this, so on and so forth, right? You've already lost so much, spatial resolution. So the solution is to, well, when you're at that small step, just unroll it the other way, right? Start expanding, right? And the reason why it's a little bit confusing in this image, at least what I think, is because you sort of go through this contracting path, and then boom, you have this giant map right here, right? So basically, it's doing this expansive path in a single step in this illustration, right? But it doesn't have to be a single step, and basically that sort of segues into the unit. Oh wait, sorry, Kartik, did you want to go over? I kind of already went over the diagram. Sorry.
Yeah, I can. I guess I can take the next part, which is the way that they describe the unit.
Sure.
So yeah, so I guess the unit builds upon this idea that Jason was talking about the fully convolutional network, and then the differences are, the first one is symmetry. So basically, they have a contracting stage, and then they have a upsampling stage, and then now at the upsampling stages, instead of sort of adding those features that would provide context, they're combining them. So they're taking the high resolution parts from the contracting layers, and then they're combining them with the sort of outputs of the upsampling to get this thing, to get this model where they can essentially keep track of context better. Yeah, so there's more feature maps in the upsampling path because of the fact that we're adding these sort of high resolution parts from the early contracting layers down into the future. So into the future upsampling layers. And so in the diagram, it kind of shows it a little bit better. But yeah, so here you can kind of see why they call it UNet. So in the first half of it, they're going down and then they're going up. And then with these gray lines, you can kind of see where they're taking the sort of the features to account for context. And I guess using this approach, they're able to sort of, I guess, better keep track of context. And I guess that was my interpretation of it. It also helps with the efficiency, which is something that gets covered in the next figure. Where here they basically show an example of the segmentation. And now instead of, so I guess in the typical approach with just sliding windows, you would need the context for every single part around your pixel that you're trying to classify. But with this new network, all they need is the only sort of areas where they consider in the segmentation maps are the areas where they have full context. So as you can see in the first part, the left side is your initial input image. And then on the right side is the segmentation map. And within here, you can see that the segmentation map is a subset of that first image. And they've only taken into the segmentation map the parts of the first image with which they can have this full border context. So the blue square around the second part is the area where they would have that full context. And what they can do here is they can sort of infer the missing context by mirroring the image. And so that allows them to handle larger images better than what the sliding window, which was sort of really computationally expensive. And then obviously you have that trade-off between patch size and context. And so in this scenario with this, what they call overlap tiling or something like that, is basically you get to sort of bypass that drawback of the sliding window approach. So yeah. And then I guess with this one, I guess we'll cover this figure a little bit later, but this is just some of the examples of the segmentation maps that they got from their outputs. And so I think in A, I think that's the input image. In B, this is sort of the results that should be received. And then and C is what the network generates as segmentation. And then D is the weights, I believe. Or I think it's the weights per pixel. And so you can kind of see where they're drawing the borders based on their network. Yeah. Guess, Jason, you want to?
Yeah, I guess I can cover this. So in addition to this new architecture that they proposed, they also took advantage of this technique called data augmentation. This is not unique to UNet. This is used widely. It was a technique even before UNet came out. But basically all data augmentation does is says, okay, you have this training set, right? Like you have a bunch of data. And maybe it's not much, right? Maybe it's really hard to get data of what you're trying to, whatever problem you're trying to solve, right? So a interesting way to actually get more data without actually having to go out in the world and actually collect more data is to look at each image and then apply some sort of transformation on it, right? So for example, with this image right here, this sort of, I guess, model plane, in the next layer down, they applied a transformation that just shifted it up, right? So one form of data augmentation is shifting. Another form of data augmentation is actually rotation. So for example, you can see from this tree to this tree, they actually rotated a bit. They also changed the color, which is another form of data augmentation. Just like they did with this cat. Looks like a negative image here. There's also shearing or just elastic deformations in general. Then I have a question from Edward. Can I see the FCMN part again? I don't know. Can you? Yeah, here it is. Did you have a question about that?
I was just wondering how this compares with region proposal networks.
Region proposal networks?
Yeah.
Can you explain what those are?
So when looking at this paper, I thought it was gonna be just a region proposal network here, but I guess not. But what region proposal networks do is that it kind of takes in the same inputs as what an FCNN does, which is like it just segments the images based on like the type of things that are inside it. But I guess what's unique about region proposals is that it uses more along the lines of bounding boxes instead of like directly like outlines the shape itself. So I guess that's like the main difference between those two. So my question is for semantic, for this type of data, for the training input, do you have to like actually physically outline all of the images yourself?
Yes. Well, so there's different ways you can do it, but the actual like label that the neural network looks at and like actually learns is that like colored, like basically it looks like this, right? And I mean, you don't have to like hand draw it in Microsoft Paint or anything. I've done this stuff in my research, and basically, if you have like, for example, an XML file that contains like coordinates of everything, right? I mean, this is kind of a complex case, but for example, if you're just working with like boxes, like bounding boxes, and you want to like color in those boxes, then I mean, you could just very easily write a Python script to like code it in. And I would imagine something similar with these shapes. You probably just define these with a bunch of coordinates and then you color it in. But yeah, like the neural network takes in this color map.
I see. Okay, yeah, that was my question.
Cool. Let's see, where were we? Yeah, yeah, that's data augmentation. So, I mean, you can easily imagine like your training data is going to like scale up a lot, right? So, if for example you have n amount of training data, then if you, for each type of data augmentation, you can also, do it at different values, right? Like you can shift by like 10%, or you can shift by like 30%, right? So, it easily becomes like, some constant times n amount of training data. And I guess I should also add, like, I mean, the importance of why we need more training data is because, well, your model is going to perform better if you have more training data, right? You want it to be robust to, for example, if there's a little bit of shifting, right? Well, it should still give you the same answer, right? Like that's still a model plane, even though it's shifted over a little, right? So, it's starting to add these what we call invariants in the network, basically building up invariants to certain transformations. You basically want your model to be robust. This is the answer to why this is so important. Cool. Kartik, do you want to go over training?
Yeah, sure. So essentially, as you'd expect, so I guess the output here, we want to classify every pixel in our segmentation map. And so the loss function here is a variant of the softmax combined with like a cross entropy. But I think the idea here is that basically you're generating a per pixel classification. And then what that does is it lets you, so this is from figure 3 again, where in C you have kind of the outputs of the segmentation results, and then in D you can see the different weights that were assigned to each of the various pixels due to the loss function, and then you can see how sort of the borders get defined with these red values. So the really high values kind of define where the borders are for the cell segmentation, and then the really low values are the remainders of the cell. So I think, without getting into too much math, I think that's
so is this loss per pixel based then?
I believe so.
Yeah, so X represents the pixel, and this is just a weighted cross entropy loss over all the pixels.
I see. So the output would just be would it still be a one-dimensional array, or would it just be like a three-dimensional?
Do you mean of the loss function, or?
Yeah.
So the loss function is going to give you a scalar. So it would be one-dimensional.
Okay.
Should we go on to the next slide? Okay. So I just want to go over some experimental results. Let me see if I could actually open up the paper. This is the second table, but there's another table in the paper too. Okay, so I mean, this is one table, and this shows the results, and you can see that there's like 3 different error metrics that they used. So obviously, the lower error, the better. And you can see, like, they, here's UNet, and these are the names of other solutions. And the reason why they bolded it is because, well, out of all these other solutions, it actually performed the best. How much? Well, just a little bit better than number 2. And then, I mean, these are all like really, really small values. So, and then of course, human errors, I mean, that's extremely small. So that's actually probably the largest jump out of this entire table. So you can see that, at least in 2015, there's still margin for improvement between the state of the art and human capabilities. Maybe this has been surpassed, like maybe humans' capabilities have been surpassed since then. I'm actually not sure. If it hasn't, then maybe that can motivate you to go out and do research and improve this. I don't know. But in the second table, right here, this image actually corresponds to this table. So this is a ISBI cell tracking challenge. It's the name of the competition that they participated in. And for their metric, they use something called, they abbreviated IOU, but that stands for intersection over union. And this actually shows up a lot, at least with what I'm aware. It shows up a lot for segmentation type tasks. Let's see if I can go back to. So this is all that IOU is looking at. It's quite literally the intersection. So if you've taken 21 or learned set theory somewhere, the intersection is just a part that is shared. And you basically divide it by the union, right? So this is just, the sum of, if you actually put like your the ground truth segmentation and then overlapped it with the predicted segmentation. And then you just, to actually get these areas, all you have to do is just count the number of pixels in here. So it's the number of pixels in this overlap area plus, the union of those pixels. Question from Edward, was UNet tested on any other data sets? I believe it was only tested on, let's see. Yeah, there was a third, oh wait, no, this is in the second one.
I think they only used the 2 ones from the competition, I want to say.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right.
And then I think in their conclusion, they were like, we think this can be applied to many other tasks. So sort of speculative, but I think.
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, that's intersection over union. And as you can see, like that's actually a pretty significant improvement. Like second best 2015. Wonder, I guess there was a first best that they left out. I don't know, maybe that's to make their model look better. But at least compared to the second best at the time, this is a pretty significant improvement.
I think they were the first best, right?
Oh really?
Oh, yeah. So
yeah, that's right.
Units first, and then
Yeah, they mentioned that in their intro or something.
Yeah. So this paper came out of competition, basically.
Yeah, that's super crazy. Like that's a super large improvement. Okay. And so yeah, so we're at the point of open discussion. So at this point, if you have any questions about anything we've gone over, feel free to ask them right now. We also have a few sample discussion questions on the next slide. But does anyone have any questions so far on just like the overview of the paper?
I don't know about overview, but how exactly does this upsampling work? I think you mentioned that it just like takes a flat input, which I'm just guessing, yeah. So like there's just some vector and it does something, but like what is it doing effectively?
Yeah, so let me see if I could draw this. So imagine that you have like some input that you want to upsample, right? So it looks, I don't know, something like that, just a bunch of pixels or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So basically you do something called deconvolution. If you are familiar with like PyTorch, I think the layer is called like conv2d transposed, I think it is. Something like that. But basically, there's a few stages. The first stage is to like flatten this. So basically it has all the same values, but just like flattened. And then the second stage is actually applying it on the deconvolution. So if you want to upsample this, you basically take this flattened, array of values and you multiply it by this matrix, right? So let's imagine like the height is longer than the width, right? So let's say this is like D. So you would have D here, and then you would have like your upsampled dimension here, where upsampled is greater than D. And this is just like matrix multiplication, right, of this thing by this thing. And so what you would get is an even longer flattened array, right? Like this is U.
Okay. And then you can put that back into a rectangle.
Yeah, and then you can reshape it into
Okay.
an even larger. Yeah. Blah blah blah.
Okay, so the UNet is effectively just like procedurally making the procedurally applying convolutions to make the image kind of, I guess, lower resolution with more features, and then just procedurally upsamples it to recreate the original resolution with classifications.
Yeah. And then Edward asked a question: does upsampling reduce the clarity of the image? So I think, let's see, I can't remember if we emphasized this. Let me remove these annotations here. How to clear all joins. Okay. Let's go back to the image of the UNet. So you are upsampling, but another step in the UNet is that you're actually combining it with some of the feature maps in the contracting path. That's what these gray arrows represent. So you're actually concatenating, these the features from that you learned in this path with this. It's literally just like stapling the features together, like a little concatenation. And I think the idea with that is that you're able to sort of combine like local information with global information. So yeah, I don't know if that.
Yeah. I was gonna say, like, I think from the contracting layers, they're choosing the features with the highest resolutions. So then when they put those back into the when they concatenate it with the upsampling layers at the end, because of these upsampling layers, as opposed to having pooling layers, they're actually able to increase the resolution of the output as opposed to decrease it. Yeah, I think the inputs and outputs in this case, the input would be an image, which would be like the biomedical image, and then after that it does all of this network stuff, and then after that the output would just be the segmentation. So it would just essentially be like I guess in this case it would be like a matrix or some sort of array of different pixel weights within which you can see the borders, kind of like the figure 3C image. Yeah, that one. I think that was my interpretation. So
yeah, let me see. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions?
I guess, yeah, so the kind of testing or comparing with labels is done just by, you look at the output segmented map and then you just see how well it fits pixel by pixel to define the loss function. So there's no like individual pixel classification in a strictest sense, I guess. You just get some sort of segmentation map or output of your UNet, and that's compared to the actual mask.
So are you talking about during training or testing?
During training.
So during training, you actually do look at each individual pixel. So Yeah, X in this case is a single pixel. And this is just cross-entropy loss, weighted cross-entropy loss over all the pixels.
But this classification, so I guess what I'm asking is like, rather than having, as you would in a normal, whatchamacallit, neural network where you'd have like a classification, just single output, let's say, like, oh, this pixel is this. Like, there's no point at which you're, or I guess, yeah, at which point are you saying that my prediction or this network's prediction is that this pixel is this class, belongs to this class? When is that decision kind of being made?
I believe it's being made in the loss function. What do you think, Karthik?
Yeah, so I think like ultimately they're classifying the pixels in that loss function is essentially like a softmax, which would basically output kind of probabilities of a certain pixel, in this case being like border or not a border. And I think, yeah, so essentially the way I thought of the loss function was like the end result was kind of a variant of the softmax where you're essentially getting classifications in that loss function. So that's how I interpreted it.
Okay. What's the output of this UNet? Like the image output?
Yeah, so I think the output is a segmentation map. So something like you would see in 3C.
Okay. And
And
that's compared to something like 3.
The input's 3A, and then the intended result would be something like 3B, where you see those different cells. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Edward asked a question, does it do labeling plus segmentation? Do you want to elaborate on what you mean by that?
So like usually when you do like segmentation, you like let's say in the image B, you see like all of those different like red, green, purple, and that kind of cells. So does it like, I guess it's not really, I think it's really dependent because of the data set. It's just all cells. But what I was wondering was that whether it also labels the cells like dead cell, live cell, like plant cell, animal cell, or something like that. I guess this probably doesn't do that because, well, the data set is just cell or not cell.
I think in this example, yes, it's just cell or not cell, but I think UNet can be extended to multiple classes. Like
Because what like the interesting thing was that you mentioned that the loss is softmax, which is because I was kind of confused as to the loss initially because softmax is used for classification purposes with like multiple different classes. But it seems for this case, they're using classification as like more cell or not cell kind of purposes.
yeah, I mean, that still is a special case of classification. It's just binary, right? But I mean, with softmax, that can be generalized to like multiple different classes. So
I see.
Yeah, I think like they also in figure 2, instead of using cells, they're using like neurons, I think. And so I think they did like a similar thing here where it's like, I guess this is the left side is an example input image of a bunch of neurons, and then on the right side is the segmentation results. And then so I guess their I guess their thesis is that this can be applied to like a variety of classification tasks. But then I guess in terms of classifying between sort of like plant cell, animal cell, or something like that, I think the assumption is that the people using the network will already kind of know like what they're looking for between them. I don't know.
all right, any other questions?
What is 3D, the image 3D? Is that something they feed into the network as well to like, is that expanding the data or is that like one of the outputs of the network?
So in their caption, they said map with a pixel-wise loss weight. So I think it's actually plotting like this. for each pixel.
Yeah, I think that's kind of like an intermediate step. I think like that's kind of what they use to then make the figure you see in figure 3C. And so it's like, this is what kind of what the UNet does is it takes that input and then using that input, it generates these weights for each pixel. And then by plotting sort of the weights for each pixel along with the pixels, you can kind of see the borders. I think what UNet does is it takes these borders and then it does the segmentation based on those borders.
So they just add it to the loss function. Is there anywhere else that they add it, or is it just like for the loss function?
I would say like these weights are the outputs of the loss function, I think. If I interpreted that correctly, I don't know.
Yeah, I think
yeah.
what it's doing is that, imagine like, covering up this sigma and just looking at what's inside. Evaluate that expression at each pixel and then plot it. I think it's more for illustration purposes rather than what's like actually used by the training process.
Would that be like W of X or P of X?
So since it says pixel-wise loss weight, you might be right. It's probably just the W and not the log part. Yeah, if it was like pixel-wise weighted loss, then it would probably be this part. But I think because it's loss weight, then it's just the weight part.
Thank you.
No problem. Anything else? So we have like 4 minutes left. I did have like some open discussion questions that we can like discuss in the remaining few minutes. So what do you all think about this particular solution, this UNet for semantic segmentation? Are there like some problems that you see? Do you think there's ways to approach this? What do you think?
Wait, can you repeat the question again?
Sure. So what do you think about this solution, the UNet solution to semantic segmentation? Do you see any problems with it? Essentially, do you think there's a better way to approach semantic segmentation?
I think my main issue with it is like it's a cool idea and it definitely works. But my only issue is like it's like a very black box thing. Like it's very hard to explain why it's able to do that. Like there's some intuition, but like in the end, it's just a U shape. Like for all we know, they decided, oh, let's just pick a letter from the alphabet and make a network out of it, and then it happened to work. I mean, there's definitely a good reasoning, but like the fact that it's so much of a black box makes me worry that researching this to very black box kind of things without intuition kind of hinders us in some sense. Because if you don't really understand why it happens to work, we might get some performance gains, but we can't build on it easily.
Yeah, I think like it looks like something that could come out of just like pure trial and error to see what kind of reduces the most error, which is because I think definitely in a lot of parts of the paper it was kind of like unclear as to what exactly about this structure and why these layers. I guess like they did explain like, oh, like maybe combining the previous high resolution features with the upsampling layers increases resolution, but then it's like, I guess why that certain number of layers and why the certain arrangements and stuff like that would definitely be helpful to know. I also think that this is kind of like niche in the sense that kind of like what Edward was talking about earlier, like you have to kind of know exactly what you want to get out of it before you go into it. Like, even though they call it kind of a general purpose network, I don't think it's like the best for a lot of tasks. I think there's just a certain like sector of tasks that it can handle really well. But yeah.
Yeah, I kind of had like a similar concern of like, or I was kind of wondering how they came up with the network architecture because it looked kind like does the paper specify like how they arrived at this architecture, like going off of other approaches that have worked?
Yeah, so they most directly improved upon the FCN. Basically, they took FCN and made it symmetric. And then they showed that that empirically performed much better.
Oh, just to clarify, is the FCN, does it normally go just from like this very low resolution all the way to the pole prediction? Because I'm not sure if the innovation was that they made it symmetric or that they're taking old, or not old, but like features during just convolution and adding that to the upsampling and feeding that into the upsampling. So is the symmetry part? Oh, okay. So that's that they added.
Yeah, the main differences are, yes, the symmetry. Also in the FCN, when they do this, when they're combining feature map outputs from the contracting path with the upsampling path, they actually sum those values, but in the unit, they concatenate it. And the effect is that you're getting more features.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that was like the second or the two main, I guess, innovations of the unit.
I mean, the intuition maybe it's like for like symmetry is kind of you would. I mean, if you wouldn't normally do a convolution and just go from like a lot of pixels all the way down to like a very low resolution image with a lot of features just in one go, then maybe there's this question of why would you like, so, yeah, like I guess if you're downsampling and you're not going to downsample from like a start to practically the end in one step, why would you upsample from kind of this very, very low resolution, I guess, image all the way up to your maxes? I'm not sure if I'm using the terminology right.
Um, so are there a few questions there? So one.
Well, I guess that's kind of like when the original fully convolution network, my understanding is that it's going from this input image that's, yeah. So it's got the input image, and so it's kind of downsampling to get a very narrow, yeah. What are those called? Like, how do I describe those? Those are low resolution, just matrices, low dimensional matrices with a lot of.
Yeah, I mean, you could also say tensor, which is just generalization.
Okay. But the specific part is like they're kind of these very long and very kind of low resolution things. And so it seems that you're going from one of those straight to your full pixelized prediction. And I don't like, I mean, I'm not exactly 100% sure why you don't normally go downsampling from your full input directly to one of these very low dimensional things and instead have several, whatchamacallit, convolutions and pooling layers.
Yeah, so my understanding is that at these earlier stages in the convolutions,
Mhm.
You're learning very low level features, right? So these are like tiny edges and stuff. And with each successive convolution, you're learning combinations of the previous layer's features. And what that happens is that you're starting to build up more higher levels of like abstraction in terms of your features. So like in layer layers, instead of a tiny edge, it might be like an ear or like a full eye or something that's built up from these combinations of these lower level features. Did that answer your question on like why we need these different?
That answers why you don't want to just downsample immediately to some very low resolution thing. But I guess with upsampling then is similarly is that you would not, like if you go from this very high, I guess like advanced or complicated features straight to your prediction without kind of trying to break those complicated features apart into more specific things to arrive at, I guess, more accurate prediction. Because you might recognize like an ear, and you might misclassify that ear to belong to a lion versus a tiger, because the structure of the ear is the same, and yet some individual components of that ear are distinct, I guess.
Yeah, so I see what you're saying. And the researchers actually also realized this problem. And there's a really useful illustration somewhere. I can't remember if it's in this paper or not. But basically, let me try to annotate this. So yeah, like, I mean, what they're doing is like, you know, they're combining this upsampling with like maybe the contracting path features from like here, right? So like they sum right here, right? But the problem with that is that you might not be very precise in your segmentation, right? So I think the solution to that was to actually look at higher resolution parts and like connect those from like earlier layers, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well then, yeah, I guess if you're doing that, I'm be very interested if there's just like a comparison of what happens if you just remove the symmetry aspect of the UNet and you just change the way that rather than summing up these, I guess, simpler features and instead just concatenate them. Or is it because of concatenation you needed to make this symmetric?
Let me think. I think my view is that like, yes, there's some motivation for making it symmetric because of the concatenation, because obviously if you're concatenating, then for example, let's say for this block, it's 4096 long, but it also has like a width and a height, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then in your upsampling, if you're concatenating, you also need a corresponding like width and a height, right? So it needs to be of like the same like resolution. If you're like doing that sum or the concatenation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so then it seems to me that the reason why they made it symmetric wasn't because it's the symmetry that's like it gives it a big additional boost, but that rather than just summing these values or features or whatever up, concatenating them, and so then they needed things to be matching in terms of dimensions, and then they would do a few convolutions, I guess, to make everything kind of like, I think that's like simplify the concatenation in the picture, because it seems like the upsampling is almost like complement to pooling as opposed to just like, it's not the complement to convolution, because their convolutions weren't reducing the dimensionality or the resolution, I guess. So yeah, I guess the idea would probably be that they would want to concatenate and then do some, I guess, learning or simplification of that concatenation. And that's why they made it symmetric.
Yeah. See, I think we're out of time, but oh yeah, we went way over. But yeah, I mean, I think this paragraph sort of gives the motivation for why it's symmetric. You could read that afterwards, but
Okay.
yeah. So great. Thanks everyone for coming. If you want to chat more about it, feel free to send messages on the reading group Discord chat. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Stop recording.
All right. See ya.
See ya. Thanks for helping.